Great. All right. So, yeah, to frame this a little bit for people that might be watching, basically, we had an exchange on Facebook about several different topics, but one of those things was um, you had asked me what you thought the difference was, what you asked me what I thought the difference was between, say, me and an enlightened master, for example.
Yes.
And I gave you a few different things about what I thought the differences might be. But one of those things was that I still experience fear and anger in my life, and then that might be a key difference. And my recollection of your response was that, well, that might be a mistake, that might be a misunderstanding, because people that are awake might also experience fear and anger maybe in a different way, but it doesn't mean that fear and anger necessarily goes away completely. And this idea of a perfect, pure enlightenment can be in the way of potentially becoming self-realized. So am I framing what you said accurately, or is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, you said not only you gave a list of let's say behavioral manifestations of enlightenment. You said
Mm.
so fear and anger, and you said about not being judgmental or critical of other people, if I'm not mistaken, and not manipulating people, not being manipulative. I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think I would probably yeah, rephrase those. I don't think being judgmental means that you're not awake. I think people can have judgments about others and can see other people clearly and observe and describe what they see. I think to me the indication of whether someone has achieved higher consciousness, let's say, let's put it that way, is not whether they're judgmental or not, but it's about their internal state while they're acknowledging those judgments. So it's about whether they can stay open and um, without, let's say, defenses or contractions while observing those judgments. Because a lot of people, when they judge, they will naturally close and they will naturally sort of resist inside because it can be uncomfortable to judge, or they can expect something to come back at them from the other person. Um, so I guess that's the way I would sort of yeah, maybe put that a little bit more accurately. And what was the other thing that you just mentioned?
being manipulative.
Being manipulative. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I think there are lots of examples of people being awake and manipulating others. I can't remember where I was going with that. Um, but I think an awakened person can be manipulative, but the agenda or the reason why they might be manipulating tends to shift. So um, it's funny using the term normal people, but people in lower consciousness, let's say, that haven't yet achieved self-realization, they might manipulate people for their own gain, for their own benefit. And my experience of people that are awake, I'm not awake myself, and I'm not claiming any attainments in that regard. I'm just giving my experience of people that are awake, but um, is that they may still be manipulative in some ways, but generally it's not for a selfish agenda. It's not to get something for themselves. It's either benevolent, so it's for the other person, or it's just some kind of play, or it's not malicious. So yeah, that's another little qualifier I think I would put on that.
Yeah. So, okay. Anything, I mean, I'm happy to start responding to that if you have anything.
No, I
So,
think that's all.
so I think the basic discussion, exploration that I would like to have with you is about the possibility that awakening is that there are many grades of between black and white.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it's not a black and white, it's not a binary, either you're unenlightened or you're enlightened, and there is a stark difference between the two on all
Mm.
levels of our humanity, but that there are different aspects of our humanity, and that uh, you may be very developed or at a very high level in one dimension and not very developed or mature in other dimensions. Um, and mainly what I'm very interested in these days is the possibility that even those people who seem very unenlightened, it's not something that's beyond, beyond the horizon and 50 years of heavy meditation practice, but it's actually very readily available to them. The foundation of
Mm.
enlightenment is
Mm.
already in some way present in their
Mm.
being, in everybody's being. And therefore,
Mm.
it's more a matter of turning your attention, but it's not the attention of the mind. It's a whole body, whole being kind of turning of attention toward an aspect of your being or your experience that is already present in you, has been present in you before you were born, and will continue to be present in you after you pass away.
Mm.
So, and that's available to everybody. And I think
Mm.
if we can look at that, that takes a lot of the what seems like numerous obstacles and a long path that we have to walk before we get to the enlightened state. So that's kind of, I think that's where my response to you, that's kind of where it came from, is a sense of um, if we look at ourselves from the outside and try to assess, it may look like we're very far away. I recognize that.
Mhm.
If we look inside, we may recognize that, oh, we're actually fully can be fully in touch, or in some, not can be, in some way are already fully in touch with infinity, with the timeless, with the undying,
Mhm.
sacred, etc. And so the foundation for enlightenment is already present in our experience.
Mm.
Does that make
Yeah, I
sense to you?
don't it does, it does, and I don't think I disagree with anything you've said there about awareness already being at the foundation of everyone's experience, and being able to turn attention to awareness and hold it there is possible for everyone in this moment, and that there are gradations of, um, let's say, levels of consciousness. It's not necessarily a black and white, you're awake or you're not. I think I agree with all of those things. I think I think there's a couple of potential points of disagreement still on the table for me. One is um, the idea that or how anger and fear might manifest in the body. And I think there's a distinction to be made between um, anger never arising at all and anger being a biological response that arises for a split second and then quickly diminishes, or someone getting caught in anger for hours or days and not being able to seemingly get themselves out of that state. And you could apply the same analogy with fear. Um, so there's a distinction there to be made, which I think is a useful distinction. And the other thing that I think is still potentially a place where we could have some fruitful conversation is around I said something to you along the lines of distinguishing between head, heart, and body, and the kinds of paths that we can take toward high consciousness. Let's say the head path being the path of wisdom and knowledge and understanding, the heart path being one of love and devotion and surrender, and the one of the body being of karma or action or service in the world. And I still see those three domains as relatively separate, but your point was that they can be seen as one, and that the head domain of knowledge, wisdom, understanding can be used to go all the way. And this is where I'm not quite understanding your point fully, but the way I understood the point that you made was um, if you are understanding enlightenment and you're gathering knowledge and you're becoming wiser, that is a way to reach full enlightenment, let's say. And then the heart and the body center, belly center, will be brought along for the journey or something along those lines. So I'm not fully grasping it, but maybe you can clarify for me.
Yeah. So let's these are two separate topics, I think, and
Yes.
let's continue because we already started speaking about fear and anger. So let's try to kind of wrap that up in some way, and then we'll go further into the integration or the wholeness of the human being. Um, so with fear and anger, first of all, I think that if an enlightened master lived in eastern Ukraine or in Gaza these days and was under bombardment and constant threat of for their life,
Mhm.
I think that a response of fear, and even not just brief moments of fear, but living as an with fear as a constant companion, would be a very natural human response to being in those situations. So I think that if an enlightened or awake master were to conclude that if I experience fear, it means I am not fully awake, that would be a very mistaken conclusion to my mind, because I think that fear is a natural response of the body and the nervous system that comes from, way, way back in our biological history
Mhm.
in response to life-threatening situations. And it's a very healthy response. And it's not very different from feeling hungry when we don't eat enough, or feeling thirsty when we have no water. And I think that the same is for anger. It's a response that I guess initially developed so that we can, you know, have all the adrenaline and testosterone or whatever body reactions we have to fight our enemy or a beast or whatever the situation was. And I still
Mhm.
it's and it still has that kind of function, response that can be very appropriate in some life situations.
Mhm.
So then we can talk about psychological reasons for fear and anger. But let's just first agree that there are some situations in human life where the responses of fear and anger are unavoidable and actually very healthy responses.
Yeah, I would say, look, it's very hard for me to say what is possible for anyone else. I know what's possible for me, and that if I was living in Gaza or the Eastern Ukraine, I would be terrified all the time and probably very angry as well. And so I think when you point to it being a natural human response, I agree very much with you on that. I think it is a natural human response. But I also think that I've heard enlightened masters describe the survival mechanism um, falling away. So the sense of a separate self falling away and it no longer eliciting the same kinds of survival type emotional responses that it might otherwise. And one particular person that I can think of that had quite a severe motorbike accident, not too long ago. This might have been 2 or 3 years ago, and um, described, first of all, falling off the bike at high speed, and then the bike skidding along the road, and then his body skidding along the road with the leather jacket and the helmet on and everything, but really being banged up. And then, you know, eventually coming to a stop, the bike and his body coming to a stop, but it's kind of laying there on the road, um, really hurt, like really badly hurt, and broken bones and, everything. And the way he described it, which really intrigued me, was in that moment, essentially, I laid down to die because there was very little chance that I was going to be rescued, or, an ambulance was going to come along in time to save my life. So effectively, I surrendered my life in that moment and let go. There was pain there. There was pain in the body, but there was no suffering because um, I've surrendered my life, and there's nothing left to hold on to or to protect in that moment. So again, it's unfortunate that I can't talk from first person experience. I can only talk from secondhand knowledge, but it sounds to me like for that person in that moment, fear wasn't there, even though it was a highly, highly distressing situation. And the survival mechanism had been surrendered to a degree where what we might consider normal human emotional responses in certain situations um, don't play out in the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think that that kind of experience can also you can find people who have no spiritual life, so to speak, who have a similar
Mm.
experience. I think it's an enlightened person can have such an experience, and it's a very inspiring, one. And a soldier in the battlefield, or somebody who has nothing to do with spirituality, can have such an experience. And
Mm.
of course, they would contextualize it differently. But I don't
Mm.
think that such an experience in and of itself is indicative of any spiritual achievement or anything like that. I can tell you, I had a not a bike, but a bicycle accident when I was 25. I was uh, I was riding down the hill at high speed, and there was a puddle of oil, I guess, on the road, and I found myself flying through the air, and the bicycle kind of continuing on their way. and
Hmm.
um, and landing quite painfully on the road.
Mm.
And once I confirmed that nothing was severely damaged, that nothing was broken, I had a wave of joy and
Mm.
elation over the fact that kind of the worst thing that could happen, happened, and I was okay. So, but I guess it was also because of the adrenaline that gets pumped into your blood in such a situation, and you just feel
Mm-hmm.
you just have a very high kind of attack
Yeah,
of
yeah,
good, good, yeah, yeah. But I want to ask you about, because there is something about if we if we want something to be true, if we believe that something is true, then we can go out into the world and find lots of evidence that it is
Mm-hmm.
actually true.
Yeah,
And if we want to refute it, we can go out into the world and find plenty of evidence to the contrary. I mean,
yeah,
we have that ability as human beings to kind of focus on what we want to be the case.
yes, yes.
Um, so let's say that the experience, let's say that um, that we stopped assuming that enlightenment would change anything in our experience or responses, and that we would
Mm.
still have all the same responses arise in us, all the same emotions and responses, and we would still um, also respond to other people and to situations in the same way as we always have. Let's put it this way, crude way. Um,
Sure.
and that So I'm just doing an exercise. I've never done it before, so let's. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but let's try. Let's try.
Let's play with it.
Let's
Yeah, sure.
let's play with that. What if that? What would? What effect would that have on our search for enlightenment if we didn't think that anything had to change in our human experience and responses?
Mm.
That was not a criterion, or that these were not criteria for enlightenment, but that it was something completely different that had to do with where our center of gravity, emotional, embodied, and cognitive, conscious, kind of where that was. Can you see such a possibility that shifted without anything else changing?
Yes, yeah, I can see that as a possibility. Yes.
So what would change in that case? What would happen?
Um, so I would describe it in terms that um, I'm familiar with, in the sense of when I first became a seeker 8 years ago, um, there was a lot that I didn't understand about my own mind and about my own emotional reactions and um, there was a sense of solidness and a sense of I am this person, this body and mind, and that's all I know. Now, 8 years on, um, there is a very different experience, I would say, of life in that there is a, if I want to look for it, I can find the background of silence in my experience, and the emotional reactivity is reduced, and the awareness around the emotional reactivity and the way the mind works and its agendas is clearer. And there is a sense of pervading peace, um, in the background. Again, if I want to look for it, if I want to put my attention there. So I would imagine that if if enlightenment were such a state where I'm effectively the same person with the same trips and hang-ups and reactivity, but awake, I would probably imagine it to be just further along that trajectory. So it's it doesn't change life. It doesn't change, the way I experience life or how life shows up in general on a daily basis for me. But it would just give a little bit more detachment, a little bit more peace, a little bit more ground, a little bit more stability, and there wouldn't be as much like resistance and striving and attachment, let's say, in me. That's how I would describe that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And would you say that the main event in what you're describing is that something that is normally very much in the background of our consciousness or
Yeah.
experience of being kind of
Yes.
moves more to the front and more to the center of our attention and emotional and embodied attention as well, not just um, consciousness of the head, right? So my sense is similar to yours. I feel that what happens as one awakens is that the context in which all our human experience, our experience of being a human being, with everything that's included,
Mhm.
um, is no longer a private, personal, uh, separate and detached from the rest of the world kind of experience, but it's actually within an infinite, timeless context.
Mm.
And so, in that sense, um, and and I think a lot of mystics and realized masters, when they discovered that, they kind of burst out laughing. That happened to me without being an enlightened master, but they burst out laughing, and they usually proclaim, "Well, I've always known that, so what's the big deal?" Right?
Mhm.
And that's because this context, infinite, timeless context, is, well, it's context, and it's the ground on which we walk, and it's the air which we breathe, it's the atmosphere in which we experience ourselves as ourselves. So that's always present.
Mm.
Um, and I would say it's present even before we were born. It's kind of, we become conscious into that. It's not that
Yeah.
it appears, it's not created as we become conscious,
Mm.
right? So therefore, in a way, nothing needs to change in our experience of our humanity for that to become at the forefront and center of our being and our experience of who we are and our life and and the world and everything.
Mhm.
I do agree with you that as that becomes the front and center of our awareness, then naturally over time, I would expect to see an integration and
Mm.
the rest of the of who we are coming into alignment with that
Mhm.
context or ground or atmosphere.
Mhm.
That may take, a few dozen years or a few dozen lifetimes, or if I don't know, that's in a way is more of a spontaneous, natural response to the discovery of that ground and that context of our life and being.
Yeah, yes, but I would say that so what it sounds like you're pointing to there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like a moment in time where that fundamental ground is realized, and then there's a natural integration process that happens from that point onwards, where nothing really consciously needs to be done. That process will naturally take place, and there'll be a natural integration. But that's not my experience in that having, okay, that's not what you're saying. All right, that's good to clarify. All right, but so then I have something else that I just wanted to highlight in that um well two more things that I wanted to highlight. One is you made the point that when children are born, they come into that fundamental ground of being, and I would agree that that's true. They are naturally very present and open and spontaneous as they're learning and growing and developing, much more so than most human adults. Um, but that what seems to happen to me as children grow into adolescence, as they grow into adults, is often they have negative experiences, say traumatic experiences, and then they'll tend to close down that natural openness and defend themselves in different ways. And by the time they're um, adults, they have lots of different closures and woundings and traumas and defense systems that make up their psyche, such that when certain events happen, um, it triggers attention to go to that defense system, and it closes them down into a very small identity. This is the ego. This is who I am. This is now at threat, and I need to protect it. And it takes attention away completely from that fundamental ground of being. It's not in their awareness at all. And over time, that fundamental ground gets lost. Generally, the way people mature is that fundamental ground gets lost. It becomes much more about, um, you know, material possessions, my relationship, my job, my hobby that I do on the weekends, those sorts of concerns, and the fundamental ground is is not there at all and not really important to them. That's the first point I wanted to make. And then the second point I wanted to make is um, it seems to me Zoom's doing funny things with balloons based on my hand gestures. It seems to me that in order to maintain our contact with that fundamental ground, there is a practice that's required, a practice of making that, um, as you say, that new center of gravity, giving it attention, giving it focus, making it primary. And then as we make it primary, as we place importance on it and place attention on it, it can stabilize, and our experience of life can change. And as you say, there can be an integration process that happens through doing that. But to me, it's a much more conscious, deliberate um, choice to do that, as opposed to something that happens and then integration naturally follows. So those were the two things that I wanted to say.
Yes. So I'd like to respond to three things, starting with
Yeah, yeah.
was with the first thing that you said is about a moment in time in which we have a revelation, and then that the effect that it can have on us. So I'm not talking about a moment in, I mean, what happens in time is that we discover that which is beyond time,
Hmm.
and that can happen, you know, at a certain moment, a specific situation, etc. But what gets revealed is something that has always been the case and will be the case because it's out of time. So it's kind of paradoxical. Um,
Hmm.
and that also relates to the point about children and being born into it. So I don't I don't have experience with children. I don't have children. I never spent much time observing children. So all I know is what I heard from other people about children, and I don't know how they came to their conclusions. But my experience, I do have my experience as a child, and I would say that, and until I was about 16 or 17 years old, I was kind of in a spiritual coma. I don't think that uh, I remember myself as a very young kid, you know, with my dad was a farmer and he grew flowers, so I have memories of myself walking with the flowers way above my head. So I know I was quite little at that time, and I don't have any memory of expansion or um, anything beyond the ground on which I was running, and the touch of water and wind on my skin and all that. So, but when I started waking up spiritually, I realized, or you know, what I was and am discovering is something that was present in the child that I used to be.
Mm.
And my sense is that it started long before I was a child, long before I was born. But
Mhm.
it's not necessarily what I was experiencing as a child. I think that as a child I was just born into the world of the material world and the world of body and environment, etc. And it's only in the spiritual awakening that suddenly you realize, oh, but that has also been there all along. I just wasn't aware of it. So that's
Mm.
what I meant by we are born into it, because we're
Mhm.
born into the timeless and the infinite. And then whenever that, some people may discover it, you know, when they're just as they are born. Some people discover it when they are 4 or 5 years old. I've heard many stories from people that I interviewed that something happened when they were 4 or 5 years old, and that became revealed to them. And it may
Mm.
happen much later in life. That doesn't matter because what we're talking about is always the case. So it's
Mhm.
beyond birth and death and anything that happens in between those two. Does
Mhm.
that make sense? I mean, I'm
Uh,
curious about
it,
your experience. Yes.
yeah, it makes sense. And I agree with you that I didn't have the expanded feeling when I was a child. I would say awareness was present when I was a child for sure, but it's not, yeah, it's not like my family valued presence when I was a kid. So it was never something that was pointed to or I was made aware of. So even though it was there and it was my background and it's always been present. You're right. It wasn't until I was much older than that. It wasn't until I was about 28 that I started to get in touch with my own presence, my own awareness. And um, so I lived most of my life as an agnostic atheist, essentially,
Right. Yeah.
thinking either God doesn't exist or we can never prove it. Um, but I think the fundamental point that I was trying to make was the process of developmental maturing often brings psychological defenses online, and that can stop the awareness of presence.
Yeah, I think that well, again, I don't know. I think children are can be very distracted by the, physiological, biological needs. And I don't know. I would have to do a research on on babies in order
Yeah,
to see.
again, I think no, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. Again, I'm not talking about the experience in the child. Maybe an example might help. So, um, let's say a child had an experience of being abandoned by its mother over and over again throughout childhood. So that feeling of not being good enough, not being lovable, um, always anticipating rejection. When in later life that child has a partner, let's say, they can often be on edge unconsciously. It's not even like they're aware of it, but unconsciously there's repressed wounding and trauma from childhood that they're always on edge and defending against. And when they suspect that maybe their partner's going to leave them or something, that can bring it to the surface. But the repressed emotional baggage, let's call it, for lack of a better term, can prevent and um, can prevent a natural awareness of presence or a natural arising of presence in the nervous system because unconsciously there's always that defense system there. Does that make more sense?
I understand. I understand the example. I would assume that maybe there are people who are so um, messed up psychologically that they don't that nothing can really awaken in them.
Mhm.
I think that anyway, I can talk about my own experience. I think I have plenty of reasons to be screwed up, and I think I am to in many ways screwed up, you know. Uh, I never, you see, I when I was 16, I decided that I wanted to understand, to know reality directly
Mm.
without the intermediaries of culture and language and thought and everything that I realized was conditioning me or limiting my ability to be in direct touch with reality.
Mm.
And I don't think that anything psychological can stand in the way of that. I know it's quite extreme what I'm saying. Maybe there are some psychological conditions. I mean, if one is clinically depressed or schizophrenic or I imagine that some conditions the psyche is so fractured and so out of balance that it kind of takes all the energy.
Mm.
But I think in the normally neurotic person, and everybody is messed up to some degree. One of my friends said that the greatest trauma that we have and is shared by everybody is that we were born, and that everything else
Mm.
is kind of secondary to that. And so I don't think that needs to be in the way of any in the process of awakening.
Okay, so now I have another question for you, which kind of brings it back to a point that I made earlier, which was around practice. So at
Yeah.
16, you had that strong desire to experience reality directly, and I understand that. I understand that for myself. And then I'm curious about the role of practice. So, did you then consciously take on practices like meditation, like self-inquiry, like, different forms of spiritual practice in order to then taste reality directly? Or what was your experience after the age of 16 in terms of practice?
Yeah, well, I tried all kinds of things until I was 25, and then I went to Japan and spent 2 years in a Zen monastery, and that's when I really got into the practice of shikantaza, which to me is a very powerful to now to these days, a very powerful practice of letting everything be as it is, and
Hmm.
not trying to manipulate or change or do anything with your
Hmm.
thoughts, feelings, sensations, e- everything that arises in one's experience. Um, which I think is the practice of enlightenment, and which means you basically let your human experience with everything that's included in it just be,
Mm.
um, without trying to change it in any way, and that
Mm.
allows that which is normally in the background kind of become the most obvious, prominent, kind of at the forefront of awareness in some way. I have to say, it's not like um, I'm walking with sparkles around my field of vision and all that. It's a very subtle, but it's an all-pervasive sense of being in infinity,
Mm.
and nothing can really shake that or negate that. So
Mm.
that's and that I think the practice of meditation has helped a lot. I think that also, and we're touching here on the practice of the jnani, the knowledge or intellectual kind of
Mm.
aspect of the spiritual search or practice. So to
Mhm.
me, the less I know the less I know conceptually and have formulations and conceptual structures that I that mediate between me and reality. So the more I can
Mm.
remove these, the closer I
Mm.
am, the more in touch I am with reality as it is.
Mm.
And that to me is the point of the intellectual practice or the practice of exploring, revealing, and looking into what we believe to be true and what we hold to be true, all the concepts we have. The more
Mm.
we dismantle and take apart these conceptual frameworks, the more in touch we can be with reality. That's my assumption or belief. And and it's an ongoing practice. It's an ongoing practice. I find that exploring with other people and revealing to myself my own belief systems and understanding helps in taking that apart. But you really have to
Yeah.
be. I'm quite committed to that, and I feel that I'm really interested in um, exploring, my concepts with people who come from completely different backgrounds and completely different traditions and spiritual perspectives.
Mm,
Because of that, because I think it's a good practice to let your own assumptions and beliefs get tested and broken, if possible.
mm, mm. Yeah, I agree with you there, 100%. Yeah, to investigate our own assumptions and beliefs through dialogue can be a very powerful practice, particularly if you're willing to be open to seeing where you might be holding on to an idea that isn't necessarily in line with reality. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yes.
that's been my experience. And also practice has been very important for me too. So I appreciate you sharing your experience at the Zen monastery and yeah, how that what I heard was allowing of all experience to unfold as it will without interfering with it. Yeah, absolutely. That's been a practice of mine. Like I would call it surrender. It can be a very challenging practice because when you go deep into the practice of surrender, there can be, hmm, how to word this, there can be strong attachments that we have that get challenged, and it becomes a very, very stark contrast between holding on and letting go. And the bodily response, the somatic response, when those attachments get challenged can be very intense and quite difficult to come to terms with. But yeah, surrender is a very powerful practice when it's taken seriously and you are committed to it for sure.
Yes. Yes. Well, it is a practice, and also I don't know if I ever told you, but I wrote an academic paper called "Surrender to Another Person: The Case of a Spiritual Master," and I just intended to write about what it's like to surrender to a spiritual master, but I ended up studying the subject or the different manifestations of surrender in different
Mm.
contexts, such as in romantic love relationship and in sex, in specifically in the practice of sadomaso in sex. People go into those practices many times in order to experience surrender, being different manifestations, very different
Mm.
maybe than the experience that you have with the spiritual master, even though there's also some relationship there. And
Yeah.
in relationship to a powerful, charismatic leader, and it can be not only in spirituality, but you can see that in different areas of life, that people really devote themselves to being in the service of a political leader or a ideological leader, etc., etc.
Yes.
And in therapeutic relationship as well. I think many people experience giving themselves, you know, over to somebody that they perceive as a very knowledgeable, trustworthy therapist, and that can
Hmm.
really help them along the way in their process of healing. Um,
Yes.
so yes,
Yeah.
surrender. I like the topic of surrender. I think it's a very juicy one.
It is beautiful, yeah, and I didn't know that you wrote that paper, but yeah, I can resonate with a lot of what you just described. So, surrender in relationship to my wife, that is a practice that goes all the way. There are opportunities to surrender all the time, almost every day, and it can become very clear to me where I'm still holding on, and still trying to keep something for myself and not be fully, let's say, one way to put it is not be fully in service or not be just there to give to her, but wanting to get something for myself. And the same thing in relationship to a spiritual master. Like I was with my previous spiritual master for a long time, and there were times when I was able to access that more devotional side and surrender to him quite fully. And there were other times where my ego and my psyche were in such strong resistance to even the idea of giving myself away to another person that um, it seemed like a stupid thing to do, or a silly thing to do that, or a dangerous thing to do that, right? So there are all
Yeah.
these justifications that come in as to why you shouldn't do that. Um, Even though I understand intellectually the benefits on the spiritual path to doing that. So yeah, surrender can be a beautiful practice, but I would say one of the most difficult things to master, to really get good at.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to your second or third point about
Mhm.
the head versus the about
Oh
uh,
yeah, I forgot about it.
head-based practices versus body and heart-based practices. So
Mm.
I want to ask you, from your experience, let's say that you are reading a text from a sutra or whatever it is, and you really try to understand it, and you read it again and again, and you kind of maybe contemplate it, and then at some point you suddenly there is like a sense of aha, I got it now I really understand what this is saying.
Mhm.
So what what changes from a moment before that understanding to a moment after that understanding? Where did that what what shifted in your experience when you suddenly understand something that you have read many times before, kind of understood on an intellectual level, understood what the words are, but didn't really get the deep
Mm.
meaning of it? So where does that understanding happen?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's like something shifts, but it's not on a head level, and I can sort of see where you're pointing to with this. It is like, it depends how you would describe um, the makeup of a human person. But if we're talking about a soul, it might be in the soul where that shift happens because it's more fundamental than just head knowledge. But yeah, I can bring to mind moments like that where I've been reading a certain book and reading, there's one particular book I can remember reading more than 10 times, and each time something would go a little deeper. And there are experiences of understanding where it was like something clicked and then something felt different afterwards. So yeah, I don't know other than to say possibly it's in the soul, but even that is it's just a word. I don't even know if the soul exists as a real thing.
Yeah. No, that's kind of where what I wanted to point at, which is that real understanding involves everything, involves all aspects of our being. And of course, there can be, let's call it understanding, there can be intellectual understanding that is divorced from the rest
Mhm.
of our being. And when somebody talks from that level, you feel that they are disconnected and that there is no transmission and no real juice to their understanding.
Mm.
But the same words can be said by somebody else, and you can feel the whole weight of their, years of practice or contemplation, and you can feel that it's connected in a way that they transmit their whole experience and being as a,
mm,
through whatever statement they make, or that, so it's the same words, the same statement can be completely superficial and disconnected from experience, and can be an expression of the whole body and the whole being, and
mm,
everything that's involved in our experience.
mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And the transmission is another very interesting subject to me because the transmission of an awakened one can be very, very powerful. And my experience is that my mind can be blown away, and I can just feel um, strong presence from them. And there is a there's a palpable somatic difference between the transmission of someone. To me, this is where, I'm going back towards the territory of black and white that we started with, but someone that's awake or fully self-realized and someone who is just maybe interested in spirituality or interested in spiritual teachings.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've also, like you, I'm very interested in the subject of transmission, and I've written and spoken with a lot of people about it. And my conclusion, and I'm curious if that makes sense to you, if that would make sense to you, is that transmission has the same, can be likened to the, what's the word, when you have two guitars and you play one guitar and the other guitar starts vibrating in the same frequency.
It's like tuning the guitar.
Resonance. It's resonance.
Yes. I see. Yeah.
Yes. So different spiritual masters or awakened people resonate differently with different seekers or practitioners.
Hmm.
And that's a very interesting phenomenon, that somebody that you would feel really is to you the sun, is the most awakened master you've ever met. Mm, and when you're in their presence, you feel your whole body vibrating. To me, I would just see, oh, can't you see this person is a charlatan and he's just completely full of ego, and I don't really don't get what you find in him or her, and vice
Hmm.
versa.
Hmm.
So there is something about this the transmission being um, a relational construct that
Hmm.
takes two to tango. So the same person can be an enlightened master to many people or to a few people, and have no impact at all on other people, while they are very deeply impacted by a completely different person. So there is
Hmm.
something about the relationship, and how each of us is tuned, or how the strings of our soul are set, so that we vibrate with certain people and we don't vibrate with others. And I think there's something profound which I am not yet very clear about, but it has to do with the spiritual mastery, the spiritual teacher and student relationship being 100% relational. It's not when we call somebody an enlightened teacher or a teacher of
Hmm.
a spiritual teacher, it's not an objective uh, construct. It's not like you can say about something, he's a biker because he rides bikes, right? But if
Hmm.
somebody is a teacher, it's because they have students and they have a relationship of teacher student with other people, and that what defines them as a spiritual master.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I find the way you introduced resonance there very interesting because the way I would have conceptualized it before, and I'm very open to what you've just outlined, and I think that's very possibly true in my own experience. But the way I conceptualized it previously was um, spiritual teachers can have gradations, so they can be, a little bit awake or a lot awake, let's say, to keep it simple. And the ones who are profoundly self-realized will have a profound transmission. And then it's about the student and the student's openness or receptivity to that particular frequency. But the frequency is the same. It's the frequency of the crown chakra or the frequency of the background of awareness, beingness that is always there. And similarly to the way that Kundalini energy might rise up the spine, it depends on openness and it depends on the energy body and how receptive it is to that. Someone's very closed off, they might not feel anything from a profoundly awake teacher. But if someone is very open in their energy body, a student is very open, they might be able to perceive subtler and subtler transmissions that others might not be able to. So that was sort of how I conceptualized it previously. But when you talk about resonance, I do feel on some level that there are certain spiritual teachers, let's say, that resonate more naturally with me and others that don't. And there, it is a taste thing. Like other people have different experiences. So I agree with you in the sense of, yeah, certain spiritual teachers might naturally gel with students better or worse. The idea of whether the resonance results in a different transmission experience or not, I'm not so sure. And I'm curious about whether maybe you have some data or some evidence to support that.
Well, I I visited and spent time in with quite a few spiritual communities or groups, and I found quite commonly people in such groups have a sense that their teacher and the situation they're in is perfection,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
their teacher is the most evolved, most advanced, most enlightened person,
yes.
and they usually feel that other teachers and other systems, other traditions are not quite as advanced or wholesome or et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And so I find myself, I usually don't say it unless I'm invited to say, unless I'm asked. But when I'm asked, I tell people in such situations, obviously this is perfect for you.
Mm,
And obviously, there is a reason why you feel that your teacher is the most enlightened person that you know. That's your experience. And you should go for that because that's
mm,
absolutely true for you.
mm.
It doesn't mean that other people may not feel the same for other teachers,
Sure, sure.
and they would be right for them.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think we know this. I know that in different people gravitate toward different teachers and feel that they found the most enlightened master in the whole history of humanity.
hmm.
And I feel that there is truth in that for them,
Sure,
and that the kind
sure.
of trust and surrender that kind of recognition or belief enable is a good thing. I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. But somehow once you
Mm,
see that you meet many different groups and you see, oh, this is a common, you see this phenomenon in every group, you realize, oh, different people resonate with different teachers and with different traditions and systems.
hmm.
And and it's we don't have to kind of compare and within each system or around each teacher there are people who are more advanced, maybe along
Mhm.
in their ability to vibrate at the same frequency as the teacher, and people who are
Mhm.
more, dim or not as, open for that
Yeah.
vibration. So that's true. There is a hierarchy of vibration within that context, but
Mm.
but there are different contexts.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, beautiful. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Amir,
Thank
jumping
you.
on a Zoom
Same.
call and having a chat to me. Yeah, that didn't necessarily go where I expected it to go, but we went to a lot of different places and it was always rich and interesting to me. So yeah, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, same here. I'm enjoying the fact that we can have such a conversation of such universal, timeless questions. You in Australia, I'm in Israel. For you, it's late evening. For me, it's morning. And that's really, thank you for making that possible.